Tricks, skills, mavericks, crazy moments. We might be living in present times now, but just a couple of years back the game was different.
Absolutely brilliant from Dennis Bergkamp.
The 90s era of football witnessed some of the most incredible names to play the sport, but in this video there can only be one winner. Who is it? Well, you'll find out soon. But before we get into anything, if you haven't subscribed to Futbol Historia yet, hit that button below so you never miss out on videos like this. Let's get straight into it now. I'm running down the names to the first. To kick things off, it's King George. Pretty obvious this isn't a British monarch. Who King George is? Simple. George Weah. A beast in the 90s, and to date the only African player to win the Ballon d'Or. George Weah didn't win this by luck. See guys, back in that period, he was as lethal as it could get going forward.
George Weah. Mr. George, that's how we used to call him in France, Mr. George. You guys saw him kind of late when he went to Milan and he was already outstanding. He won the Golden Ball there. But I saw him in Monaco. I was in the youth academy and he was playing for Monaco, and some of the goals that he scored are in training. It's just sheer power. I've never seen that before like that.
I could go on and on about George Weah, or his goal-scoring record of 215 goals in 539 career games. But there's something Henry said about him in the last part of that interview that stands out. George Weah was a trailblazer who changed the game. It was popular to see so many strikers of that era waiting for balls to come in the box because that was the traditional description for a number 9. But with George Weah, he became a mix of dribbling, speed, athleticism, strength. He was the total package and inspired a generation of ballers like Thierry Henry. The 90s weren't just full of attacking talent though. Down the middle, this era witnessed some proper midfielders with the ability to be both exceptional defensively and offensively. And one of the best ones was this guy, Roy Keane. You probably remember Roy Keane more for incidents like this, or that tunnel bust-up with Patrick Vieira. But you see guys, before that, especially in that 90s period, he was an incredible footballer.
And then Roy took over from that and was just, you could argue, the best defender in the team, you could argue he's the best attacker in the team, he's one of the best passers in the team, he ran the most, so all the facets of the game.
Honestly, on the ball, Roy Keane was exceptional. What gives him the edge, and has him on this list guys, is that amongst exceptional midfielders, Roy Keane was one of the very few who could do everything. We talked about his defensive abilities. He could tackle, run hard yards to cover for his teammates, and get players into positions talking through the game. But on the ball, his range of passing, knowing when to play the right pass, when to switch it criminally goes under the radar.
If I was going to name my best ever 11, Keane would be the first on that team sheet.
Why Roy Keane? Because Roy Keane's a leader.
He could again do everything. In the 90s, Man United was the most dominant English team of that era, culminating with the team winning the treble in 1999. To be captain of that historic team and have his former teammates calling him the best player on the pitch, that's amazing. Having Roy Keane in the list of greatest midfielders of all time might sound a bit subjective, but for this next guy, there is no debating it. One of the best players of the 90s? Yes. All time? Yes. At right back? Yeah, Cafu. For a long time now, possibly the greatest right back the game has ever seen. He was ahead of his time before the trend evolved. With the stamina and ability to move down the touchline, he was as good defensively as he was swinging crosses in from the fullback position, and his longevity helped him become a mainstay of that Brazilian national team for decades.
Cafu or Marcelo?
Cafuringa.
Cafu or Philip Lahm?
Cafu.
Cafu or Gary Neville?
Cafu.
Cafu or Zambrota?
Cafu.
So good that another legendary fullback, Roberto Carlos, wouldn't pick any other option. So why does Cafu make the list then? In the modern game now, we've seen lots of incredible talents in that position, the likes of Trent Alexander-Arnold. It highlights the role of just how important the fullback slot is. And now, to be having a player who is ahead of his time with traits like this, I mean, a lot of people remember him captaining Brazil to winning the World Cup in 2002. But people also forget that he was part of the team that won it in 1994, the only player to play in 3 consecutive World Cup finals too. You've got to respect the history he created over the years. Cafu was ahead of his time, and so was this next guy. Now, I'll be honest here, it was hard trying to pick who the greatest goalkeeper of the 90s was, especially with the talent pool of goalies that existed in this era. The likes of Claudio Taffarel, Walter Zenga, and Michel Prudhomme. For what they went on to achieve, Gianluigi Buffon and Oliver Kahn would have been excellent choices as well. But with these two, they had their best years in the 2000s, and ultimately, It was down to either Edwin van der Sar or Peter Schmeichel, and in the end, the Big Dane wins it. Why? Well, in the 90s, he was a freak. At 6'4", some of the saves he pulled off with that sort of frame were insane. Heck, some should be illegal. His impact on the pitch also extended to his team. See guys, when he arrived at Man United, the club was approaching a 30-year drought in the league. I know we talked about Roy Keane earlier, but Peter Schmeichel was just as important to that United team that dominated the 90s as anyone else was. Just to add to how much of a freak he was, he could come up with the occasional goal too. Imagine that, a goalkeeper with a striker's instinct. Now that's something. Peter Schmeichel was also part of the Danish team to make history, after being the man behind the sticks for the team that won the Euros in 1992. They won it despite not even qualifying for the competition. This just adds to his legend. And speaking of legends, this next man on the list paved the way for future generations. Prime Neymar before Prime Neymar. That's how good he was.
Eu havia dito em uma entrevista antes, se eu tenisse nesta época de hoje, seguramente eu iria ser melhor do mundo outra vez. Se tivesse com 25, 26 anos, seguramente eu não ia ser solo uma vez melhor do mundo, ia ser mais vezes. Os dois são muito buenos.
Well, for one thing, the man himself certainly thinks he would have been a total hotshot in this current era. And with the way he played in his career, I honestly don't doubt it.
Ronaldo, I knew how good he was. And he had that bit of an unusual style. You know when he struck the ball? Yeah. It's like, but he had these little flicks, tricks, scoops.
Rivaldo was a combination of everything you'd want from an attacker. Flicks and tricks? He's Brazilian, he could pull it off. Dribbles? Too easy. But what set him apart was that he could combine all of this with goals, and goals in big games too. Clutch moments like this one, a brace in the final of the Copa America versus Uruguay in 1999, scoring against Argentina in the same competition, or this goal versus Denmark to make it a brace and help Brazil to a 3-2 win in the 1998 World Cup. Rivaldo was at the peak of his powers back then, and in 1999 he was crowned as the best player in the world. That's when he won the award, but honestly, he could have won it in 2 or 3 seasons earlier, if not for the amount of talent that existed then. Some pretty interesting names so far, and debatable ones too. But now guys, we're heading into the top 5, and the guys on this side of the list were the proper OGs of this era. If there was one player who we could confidently say embodies what the 90s football was all about, it's quite certainly this man, Eric Cantona. Charisma, class, attitude, goals, so many him moments.
Who is Eric Cantona?
You know, Cantona, right? For me, he was the biggest.
Nice.
He was the biggest star of the Premier League.
This isn't a lie.
Right, so the Liverpool game, Eric's big comeback.
I think I was the only person in Premier League history to score a goal and run off, and the camera go on Eric.
Neither is this as well. Whatever Eric Cantona did was as cool as it could get. The Premier League was starting to gain global attention in this period, and if there was a star of the show, it certainly was Cantona.
Going into the Bath, we played Leeds United, we beat them 2-0 at Old Trafford. And I don't know why I went into the Bath. For some reason, maybe fate, I went in, and Bruce and pals are going on about Cantona, about his balance, his movement, his strength, and he was a threat to them all day. And it stuck in my mind. And the phone call came in from Bill Fotherby of Leeds United.
He even had his opponents talking about him before he made his move to Manchester. When he did make the move to United, he wasn't just the best player in the league or the country. There was even the argument that he was amongst the very best in the world. 185 games in this period, 82 goals and 66 assists. And yeah, Cantona's game wasn't just about the goals, it was about how they came. This one is an all-timer. The iconic lob, the arms in the air celebration with his collar up. We talk about the mavericks that existed in the 90s, and Cantona was right up there with the best. Even when he went dirty, it still brought him something. Karate kicking a fan, doing suspended jail time, coming back, and picking up from where he left off. The man is a legend. The same way in Italy, Il Divinquarino is too. The thing is, guys, it's a sad story when it comes to speaking about Roberto Baggio. Ask the average fan today who he is, and the first thing that comes to mind is most likely that penalty miss against Brazil in the World Cup final shootout in 1994. But if you take this moment away and look at the player himself, then what you'll be seeing is most definitely one of the greatest players to play the game. Not just in Italian football, but in the game's history. He made the world fall in love with the game. He was like an artist on the ball. Every touch had the crowd on its feet. and when Baggio was on the run, it usually always ended in a similar outcome. One of the best goals in World Cup finals history, Roberto Baggio was an enigma, the only Italian to score in 3 World Cups, playing for teams like Fiorentina, Juventus, Inter Milan and AC Milan. But it was in 1993 on the books of Juventus that Baggio grabbed the attention of the entire world. A year before his infamous penalty miss, he won the Ballon d'Or and was voted the best player on the globe. Perhaps the best thing about Baggio was that he managed to achieve a lot in his career, even when his body gave him reasons not to. After suffering a ligament injury to his knee at 18, his career should have been over. Think about everything we've said about the man so far. That iconic goal versus the Czech Republic we saw earlier. And imagine the man doing it with a knee looking like this. Italy has produced some incredible footballers over the years, just like Baggio. But at number 3, it's a position fitting for a man so good that his jersey number was retired by one of European football's most iconic clubs. Honestly, Paolo Maldini needs no introduction. The name talks about a man who is regarded as one of the greatest defenders in football history.
A human being is even better than the player, if that can be possible. You know, it's just a privilege to have you with us tonight, and I think that you're being humble because you brought a bit of a winning mentality to Milan, so I'm happy to see you there, and I just wanted to tell you that, man, you used to scare me.
Thank you. It's not every day you see a player like Thierry Henry getting starstruck. But the same thing that happened to Henry talking about Maldini is happening here trying to talk about him. He was a defender's defender. He was that good. I mean, this is him putting one of the cleanest slide tackles you'll ever see here. And yet, he's also the same guy who famously once said that if he has to make a tackle, he's already made a mistake. Maldini's career was as long as his legend. Get this, he made his debut for Milan in 1985 and got to play against the likes of Diego Maradona. But for the context of this video, what makes him the legend that he is that we understand that the 90s were characterized by so many mavericks. Players who could change the game at any moment. A tough era. And yet in that tough era, Maldini was the best defender. So good that after he retired, AC Milan gave him the highest honor possible. The club retired his legendary jersey number 3 shirt. A club like Milan, with all the legends and Ballon d'Or winners that have come and left the club, to be given that type of honor, that's incredible. In his illustrious career, you hear attacking players talk about how scared they were to play against Maldini, as Henry did. But what if I told you that at number 2, it's a player so good, he became the only player Maldini ever feared? Ronaldo Nazario. R9, the original Ronaldo, O Fenomeno, had so many variations to the name, but the talent was the same. Phenomenal. To put Ronaldo Nazario into perspective, it's as difficult as it gets. For a defender, he was the stuff of nightmares. Why? Well, remember when we talked about George Weah's abilities and Roberto Baggio's technical brilliance? Now imagine a player with all these combined and having the speed, raw strength and finishing ability to score from impossible angles. This only describes half the talent of R9.
For me, Ronaldo the Phenomenal was different because he was football. He was not playing football, he was football because everybody wanted to be him.
He certainly changed the game. 34 goals in 34 matches for Cruzeiro, 57 goals in 54 games for PSV, broke the then transfer record and moved to Barcelona, 47 goals in 49 games, broke the world transfer record again to join Inter Milan, 59 goals in 99 matches. By the end of the 90s, Ronaldo Nazario was the guy at the top of the pitch. Aged 21, he became the youngest ever winner of the Ballon d'Or in 1997. In the 90s, Ronaldo Nazario was so much more than just a striker, he was a sensation. He replicated the same success for Brazil too, an all-round talent. I could go on and on talking about Ronaldo Nazario, but he has to come in second on the list because at number 1, it quite simply had to be this guy, Zinedine Zidane. Zizou, the type of player that made stats, goals and assists look useless.
Now, without trying, you play him a ball anywhere on the pitch, any height, any level, any speed, he'd bring it down like it was just one of those things that he does.
Of all that's been said, the part where Beckham talks about people turning up to the Bernabeu just to see him control the ball, that's just on another level. A lot of people remember Zidane after he made the move to Real Madrid in the early 2000s, but even before that move, he was already turning heads in Italy and France. At club level, Zidane had already won Serie A twice, the UEFA Super Cup, And with France in the then biggest game in the country's history at the time, Zidane was clutch. A brace in the 3-0 win in the final to seal it. Zinedine Zidane inspired a generation. You talk about present-day players, the likes of Jude Bellingham for example, and he's a role model. Even Lionel Messi respects him. I know we did say he made goals and assists look useless, but it takes nothing away from the fact that he could strike a ball. And it doesn't get any better than when he hit arguably the greatest ever goal in a Champions League final. That volley against Bayer Leverkusen was incredible technique. Making the world record move from Juventus to Real Madrid in 2001, Zidane was the poster boy for Real Madrid's early charge of reassembling the Galacticos 2.0. And looking back at it now, another famous name should have been following Zidane years after, but he rejected the offer. Click the next video to find out the only player who had the balls to refuse Real Madrid.